We've never had good coverage on this issue. It's always been terrible. Like, this is a breakthrough that they even give us.
Yeah, you guys.
No, not just you guys, but even that the mainstream newspaper in town would even do an editorial. It's a breakthrough. We're never going to get mainstream news coverage for a number of reasons, but the most obvious ones, they have a stake in the outcome, and the stake is to maintain the status quo. They're the beneficiaries of this terrible system. And there are some wonderful media owners who are independent owners or who are on our side because they know they're about to get crushed unless they get some protection. But as a rule, the existing interests are not going to cover this issue, nor will they cover related issues that point to the severe weaknesses in our system. The most recent case being when the New York Times did that excellent expose of the 75 bogus generals they were generals, but spreading sort of pro-war propaganda, allegedly as independent experts. And how much coverage did that story get in the news media? The broadcast news media, who were actually the ones who were guilty of this. And it wasn't a story about the Pentagon, it was a story about the news media. The news media should be aware of this stuff.
And they're still using these guys.
Exactly, they're still using it. That's a media story. That's a big media story, but it's not covered as a media story.
Media doesn't cover media. And you know what the tragedy of this is? We had our first conference in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm an editor of the paper. Our paper is independent, locally owned. And so we didn't have any problem covering this conference for a variety of reasons, and Bob's written pieces for it. So it's a unique daily newspaper. But we, each day of the conference, published an interview with Walter Cronkite, with Studs Terkel, with all of these celebrities who had come to the first conference. And what is amazing to me is that if we say that local media is about covering good stories, things that people might be interested in, well, here we have come to Minneapolis, and we have brought them Dan Rather. We have brought them Phil Donahue, Bill Moyers. We have brought them Naomi Klein. We've brought them some of the most exciting and interesting thinkers, Lawrence Lessig, people from across the spectrum, and these people are all ready.
Good stories.
They're ready to be interviewed. They're sitting there waiting to be interviewed, and so this is. I mean, you want to see the crisis. You want to see how bad it is. That even when they have great stories with members of Congress and FCC commissioners on hand, they say, "Oh, that's not news." It's really tragic because not covering media causes you to miss some of the best stories in what we all admit is a media culture.
Imagine if this was a conference about some other area but media, with the exact same people, exact same turnout. Would it be covered by local media? Of course it would be.
Yeah.
It would be
on
no-brainer.
Almost any other issue, you bring Lawrence Lessig, Phil Donahue, Bill Moyers. You just keep running the list.
Senator Dorgan, that's the commissioners.
I mean, all here, and is it not significant when 3,000 people gather to do anything? I would hope that we have not become so callous to culture. We're a gathering of 3,000 people, roughly the same number of delegates you will have at the Republican National Convention. Is not news.
Sure.
Why aren't we news?
I think you've been waiting the longest.
I'd like to. I'm Mark.
Well, I've written at length on the history of this. A couple of the books I've done long chapters on why we don't have that sort of system in the United States. And so I won't regurgitate that history here, but I will say, in the 1990s, it became commonly posited in the United States and elsewhere in the world that with the rise of multi-channel cable and satellite television and then the World Wide Web, there was no longer any need for publicly subsidized public broadcasting, be it radio or television, because we'd have all our needs met with the World Wide Web and multi-channel satellite and cable television. I think that argument, which was very popular from about 1993 to about 1997, or maybe even 2000, has now been completely rejected as preposterous because we've seen what we're going to get from multi-channel cable and satellite. We're not going to get anything remotely satisfactory. The case for having well-funded public media, community media, a heterogeneous system, not a central command system, but one that allows for different voices at the local and national level, and one that allows for finance. You have the resources to do good content, journalism and otherwise. I think the case has been made strongly. I think most places in the world get it now. And I think that what was seen at one time as a dire threat to Scandinavian or German or British public broadcasting systems, now they're in the process of making, I think, what will probably be a very successful transition to the digital era. We have that problem in the United States. We've got to come up with a plan for public media. And I use the term media rather than broadcasting because it's going to all be digital. And I think we have to somehow find a way to channel resources to a viable system of public media, we have community public stations. And how we fund it, I'm not sure exactly. That's the sort of thing we need to debate. But I think the case has been made to my satisfaction, and I think we can win this argument politically to everyone's satisfaction, that this is something that's desperately necessary for our society on a whole number of different levels. Journalism being one, like just the question that was just talked about with foreign correspondence, or local journalism is another example. I have a show on the NPR affiliate in Illinois, WILL in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, and that's the only station now that covers that community on radio in our community. There's no radio journalism outside of Will, is there?
WRFU.
Excuse me, commercial radio.
Okay, right. Yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
No offense to our good friends at LPFM station WRFU in Urbana, but I mean simply, it used to be 25 years ago. If you were in a city like Washington, D.C., there were 24 full-time radio reporters just covering the District of Columbia, not even covering Capitol Hill, because every station was required to do 5-minute broadcasts, so they had to have a news director who covered the community. So now that's been ceded entirely to the public and community broadcasters. They're the ones who are doing that. So that's a justification or necessity for that funding. And then the one thing that Europeans know really well, that Americans are learning in a very difficult way, we need to have non-commercial programming for children under the age of 12. It has to not just be an option out there, it has to be the only thing kids are seeing under the age of 12. What we're doing to children in this society is an absolute scandal. In Norway, where my wife is from, in Greece, and many parts of Europe, it's illegal to telecast advertising to children under the age of 12. It's illegal. It's against the law. Now, the reason they can pull that off is they have great public systems doing quality programming to kids. If you did that in this country, kids would end up watching the shopping channel. Is there anything to watch for them? Because there's no public... There's decent public broadcasting to kids under the age of 4. But PBS drops them at like 4 or 5, and they do nothing for kids older than that. We need to... And that's when kids desperately need it. So my daughter dropped that rocket engine at age 4 or 5 and has been on the Nickelodeon Disney Channel circuit since then. That's not acceptable.
Let me just offer to grow off this as well. One of the things we have to do is break the way that Americans think about media. Somehow they think of media as something that is separate from the political culture, the political discourse of the country. It is something that happens. It evolved naturally. There was a swamp. There was some sort of little tiny creature swimming around and crawled out and became Rupert Murdoch. The fact of the matter is that we don't have a natural media system in this country. We have a media system that was created by regulation, by laws and rules and bylaws.
And subsidies.
And subsidies, huge subsidies. Our media companies use the people's airwaves free of charge, with no pay, and with very, very little demand on them. Now, the key here is to make media an issue. And in much of Europe, media is an issue. I don't mean a front burner issue. I don't mean it's the only thing that people talk about. But when Bob and I wrote the first books that we did together, one of the things we did was go through the platforms of European political parties, and every one of them had a section on media and said, here's what, if we are elected, here's how we will fund community radio, here's how we will regulate this, here's what money we'll put. They were very, very detailed about it. In the United States at that time, our political parties had no mention whatsoever. In 2004, the year after this movement was started, the Democratic Party actually put a significant plank in on media. That was progress done by our allies in the Communication Workers Union, quite frankly. And all I would tell you is this. The way that you get a media system that pays attention to the needs of communities is to have media be a political issue, i.e. to have political parties competing and saying, if we win, this is how we will fund public broadcasting, this is how we will fund community broadcasting as something that is good for a community. And the odd thing about it is, in the United States, we willingly have a debate about whether you will provide subsidies to airlines to fly to certain places, to railroads to keep going to certain places, because we think transportation is vital, right? So we think, of course, if it's some remote place, we've got to provide some transportation. Our postal service goes to immense lengths to make sure that mail gets delivered to rural places. And yet, we say, but we will not do that for communications. We will not do that for this vital underpinning of our democracy, which is our media system. It is absolutely absurd. If a train can take you someplace, then you ought to be able to tune into a community radio station or to something to tell you about that place.
John, I'd like to